Zack, welcome to MetLife TTX Talks.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. It's so good to be here.
Excellent. I am so thrilled to have you with us today. Not only you had an impressive career, I know that you had worked for companies such as Coca-Cola, Morgan Stanley, Samsung, but also you became a leader with nothing less than OpenAI, the company that, among other things, created ChatGPT. So I would love to start a conversation by really going back to the beginning of your journey. So just give us a sense of what got you excited with STEM and what inspired you to make STEM your career.
Well, I'll start by saying, and I think people will discover this as we speak, I was born with an optimistic disposition. So I inherited a genetic predisposition to believe that today was a great day and tomorrow would be a better one. And sort of grew up believing this. And then when I got to Berkeley and studied history and computer science, all the evidence started to point that not only was my genetic predisposition reasonable, but in fact there was historical case for it. And history shows you that the world does get better all the time, not always linearly perfectly, but over great sweeps. And computer science actually helps you understand why, right? We can sort of explore how technology has improved the living condition for increasing percentage of the world's population. And so my interest in STEM is actually as much an interest in sort of exploring what it means to build a better world as it is in exploring the science itself, which is why so much of what I do today borrows from historical context. And my journey into AI was quite honestly happenstance. I was interested in working in technology, and as you, I'm sure, remember, in 2009, there wasn't a whole lot available. And I happened to get a job at a company called Crowdflower, where the CEO, Lucas Biewald, hired me, of all things, to help them move from a studio apartment into their first office. Now, Crowdflower went on to become a very important machine learning company, helping basically the first scale AI, helping machine learning engineers build these really large human curated data sets. And so my journey into AI was basically born from a desire to explore technology as a means to make the world a better place.
I love it, honestly. And I love that, to your point, the optimistic. And as you see technology, I'm assuming the faster technology works, the better we can make the world that we're all living in. So talk to me about a little bit about that, because you started almost 16 years ago and you talked about AI, and AI has so many different forms. How's your work has been involved from those early days to what it is now?
When I got into AI, and again, you may very well recall this from your own journey, the limits of AI were pretty shallow. I mean, machine learning was limited at the time to statistical machine learning, and we were pretty good at building machines that could sort of think in very straight lines, quite a distance, but it was effectively if this, then that rules, millions of them encoded into these algorithms. And so the algorithms were, limited to things like product recommendations and search results. And they were limited to companies that could afford to train really, really large and expensive, if this, then that algorithms. And that meant that we were sort of, at the time when I joined, very focused on serving a small number of companies with a very small set of problems. And that was true basically until 2015, 2016. So for about 5 years, AI was, statistical machine learning was pretty focused and narrow in its solutions. We saw a bunch of false dawns, of course, during that time, one of them being Siri, which everyone can still sort of laugh about. And then we started to see breakthroughs in neural nets, but it wasn't until the seminal paper, Attention is All You Need, which is the title of a brilliant title of a paper published by 8 Google researchers. We call them the Transformer 8 now, who said we were building machine learning models all wrong. And instead of building models that think in straight lines, we should build models that think in parallel. And the parallelization of information allowed us to build much more interesting neural nets. And as we started to explore with transformers, the ability for AI to do not just more things, but far better things became something much more real. And then we started to see, of course, these better language models Translation, of course, became a sort of a solved problem in many ways. And then obviously image to text, text to speech, text to video, and even 3D modeling now. We're sort of seeing this incredible sort of Cambrian event in what these technology is capable of that actually happened from, basically a critical frontier breakthrough in the architecture of AI.
Now, we talked a lot about AI, and recently, I was in the news, an MIT study that surprised a lot of people. Well, there's a lot of excitement. The study also said that 95% of enterprise AI pilots are failing, and they made a point that delivering zero return on investment. So what are your thoughts on that study, and where you have seen AI scale successfully?
Let's also acknowledge that if 95% of pilots are failing, it means that 5% are succeeding. And what we should point to is, of the 5% that are succeeding, how much change are they driving? And what is the cost of the 95% that are failing? Because it used to be, and you know this well, when we ran technology experiments, they often came with incredible price tags, right? The idea that you would run a few pilots a year wasn't so much that you didn't want to run a bunch a year, is that you couldn't really afford to. I mean, it was very expensive to do all this. Now testing, I think, is quite inexpensive. And so I also think we shouldn't actually point to 95% and just say that's bad. We should also, though, acknowledge, Bill, the point of pilots should be to arrive at an interesting outcome as quickly as possible. And so testing to discover failure is just as important as testing to discover wins and success. And where I think we are seeing the most success, certainly where I'm seeing, and I assume where you are, is the intersection of two things. One, where a tool is designed around a solution, right? A very specific solution or result in mind. Too often, I think people are treating AI as a silver bullet and saying, we're going to do everything with this. And the success criteria is not actually defined enough to achieve it, right? It's so sort of ambiguous what it means to be successful that a pilot fails simply on measure of not knowing if it's going to succeed or not when it does. And the other change that is so important, and you know this very well, is the people. And we are still organizations built by people, for people. And it turns out that's probably not going to change in AI. And so actually building the tools, not just to solve a problem, but to allow people to do their job better, to improve the customer experience, becomes really critical. And that requires change. And behavioral change will remain, I think, especially in the age of AI, the single biggest factor in considering and determining the success of AI adoption.
What is your sense in terms of, with things moving so quickly, how does responsible use of AI also plays a role into what companies should be thinking about?
Well, so I think responsible business is something that we should continue to spend a lot of time talking about in a world where we have an abundant amount of resources, and the ability to provide more access to better goods and services to more people should be the goal of an economy, because that's how we move the world forward. And sometimes we lose our way in this. But what's interesting now with respect to the tools that we are building today is the ultimate promise of AI to me is, one, creating a more accessible world where more of the goods and services that people need are more readily available to more people. Now, most companies today are so well bound by a set of rules, ethics, and of course, morals and values, that I actually challenge that I don't know that we need a bunch more rules with respect to AI. What we need to do now is very clearly consider our values and our rules more carefully, because our options for building these companies are getting greater. And the three things that I talk about when people talk about ethical or responsible AI are, one, alignment. Does the model, or in this case, sort of the collection of models and machines, appreciate the consequences of their actions with respect to the human experience, right? Mm-hmm. Do the machines have human values, or can they appreciate the human experience? And this is a big, complex problem that actually needs to be solved mostly at the model manufacturer level. And this is a question that is for good reason, on every CEO's mind, in particular, the ones building these models, and now increasingly on the regulator's mind. And building international alignment standards is going to be a critical pursuit as we move forward. The second is explainability. Explainability is a really important thing when we talk about responsible and ethical AI, because where most people use the term bias as a pejorative. So for example, when people say, well, how do we limit bias in the machines? What I have to remind everyone is the only reason the machines work is because they're biased. In the same way that we only work because we're biased, right? Our biases are actually the things that separate us from each other, and or certainly what we want in life. And what's really impressive is that humans often feel like the world is unfair, not because it is strictly unfair, but because it is inexplicable, right? We don't understand the choices that most people around us make. And the problem is not bias, it's that we can't actually know our biases. And even if we did know our biases, we would never admit them. What's really fascinating now about this moment is that we can build machines that don't have the ego and don't have the sort of complexity that humans do in our societal structure, such that they can explain themselves. The pursuit now needs to be not building machines without bias, but building machines that can explain their bias so that we can know how and why they have arrived at a decision. And this becomes really critical as we start to ask the machines to do more and more things, such that we are building a world that isn't a black box, but actually a transparent one. The third is bad acting, Bill, and this is one that we need to talk about, especially with respect to financial services and healthcare. The ability for an individual to do more harm is expanding. We have to acknowledge this. And this is a double-edged sword, because while everyone now can do more, and for many people on earth, that's going to be a great thing. More people doing more good is going to create a better world. For some percentage of the population, psychopaths and financial criminals, this is going to result in harm for the rest of us. And responsible AI has to take into account that these tools are enabling some percentage of the population to do more harm, and swiftly and prudently protecting society and the trust that we have built from these bad actors is critical.
No, I agree with you. I mean, and two things that you mentioned that is really resonate with me. One is obviously your ability to make sure that you build this in such a way that you have the transparency, being able to explain. It's not around eliminating all the biases by understanding how those biases and where those biases will build. And the second thing you also talked about it, which is huge, is the same tools that I'm excited about it to service my customers. There is a percentage of populations that they're using them to do harm. If you have to choose one industry that you think that is overdue for that AI profound change revolution, which one will it be and why?
Well, it's not hard in my mind. There are three, and it's the three big ones. It's healthcare, it's education, and financial services, probably in that order. And I think we are at a moment now where many people around the world, in the developed and undeveloped world, are experiencing a lot of abundance and luxury across their lives. And most of this is found in sort of what we consider discretionary.
Yeah.
Obviously, our life expectancy is expanding in most places, but the reality is many people still feel like healthcare and great education, and to a certain extent financial services, are not within reach. And we have the ability now to apply technology in such a way that it scales access for these things. And my expectation is, as everything else starts to get less and less expensive, it will create a more glaring gap between what people should expect and what people get from these institutions. And I'm really excited, albeit with some degree of caution, at the ability to see, I think, actually revolutionary change.
You often use the phrase unmetered intelligence, so where AI is readily available, accessible without limitations or restrictions. How should we be preparing for that?
The theory of unmetered intelligence is something that Boris Power and I, the head of research engineering, and I coined it at OpenAI in 2021. We were trying to describe to CEOs why GPT-3 at the time mattered. And you may recall the models at the
Yeah.
time, but they were very slow. They were very expensive, actually, about $30 per million tokens, $25 per million tokens. And they weren't very good. I mean, by any measure today, certainly. And the CEO said, this is not very interesting. And we said, okay, fine. But what if these models got a lot better, a lot faster, and a lot cheaper? And the most effective way we knew to describe this world was this idea of unmetered intelligence, a world where intelligence followed the same path as other now utilities like water or foodstuffs, electricity, and the internet, where one day we saw something as very scarce and the next day we actually saw it as quite abundant. And in the same way that you don't really think twice by running your hands under water or by turning on and off a light switch, or by searching something on the internet, we once did, right? We once saw these as like very, very special resources. And the world gets better when we make them abundant. And intelligence, I would argue, is actually on that path, that it may one day soon be seen as a utility. Now, what I'm not implying here, Bill, is that we will have universal brilliance. In the same way that the internet does not mean that everyone can do research, or chooses to, and the same way that literacy does not mean that everyone reads. Unmetered intelligence does not mean that everyone will be brilliant. It simply means that people will have abundant access to intelligence, and what they choose to do with it then becomes the critical differentiator. And so in this world, I would argue that agency and individuals' desire to change or to improve their lot or their experience will actually become one of the critical, if not the critical resource. And what you do then with this intelligence or with this access to intelligence will be sort of the defining characteristic of your experience in life.
I love the other term that you use, universal brilliance. I had to write it down. That don't assume that everybody you're gonna have a universal brilliance. But also some people, and especially again, recent headlines say that unmetered intelligence will compress the career ladder and reduce some of the entry-level jobs. Do you agree with that statement?
I think there's an incredible overreaction today by many corporations to stop hiring young people. I think that's a big miss. I think we're going to look back and say, oh, we shouldn't have done this. And I think it will end up hurting companies that don't actually build a pipeline of really thoughtful, excited young talent. I just believe that to be true. The other thing I think is happening is we're seeing a world where the people entering the workforce are far more equipped than ever before. But the other reality is these young people are so capable today, and the workforce and the workplace has not actually updated to their ability to do things. And so there's this amazing sort of counterbalance right now between us saying, oh, we don't need more young people. But in fact, it is many of these like entry-level employees now who are far more equipped and capable because they've been raised and sort of educated in an environment where the tools are sort of second nature. And the seesaw now, I think, is going to exist again at this point of agency.
Yeah.
The winners are going to be the ones that can navigate this change by really enabling, at first identifying and inspiring an entry-level workforce, and then engaging and enabling them to do far more than certainly you or I could when we entered.
So Zack, great perspective on all of this, and we're learning so much in terms of who Zack is as a business and your business perspective. I wanted to also find out more about Zack, the person. So I think I'm going to go to ask a couple of few lightning round questions to be able to just finish our dialogue, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, so what is your personal motto?
My personal motto: today is the best day to be born, and tomorrow will be too. Optimism is not naive.
What is the boldest business decisions that you have made so far?
The single boldest business decision that I've probably ever made is to leave OpenAI in the pursuit of moving home to Santa Barbara to be near my family. I spent so much of my life telling people that in a world of abundance, community is going to matter more than anything. We should build a more humanistic world. And I woke up one day and said, actually, I should live that truth. And it was terrifying and probably financially bad, but emotionally and spiritually, it's the single best thing I've ever done.
So if you can disrupt any sector outside of your own, which one that will be?
Education and healthcare. I am so eager to live in a world where we can imagine, we can know what it is like for everyone to have access to the services that build a flourishing life. And I think with a nod to housing, right? If we can solve healthcare, education, and housing such that these can be things that people don't have to hope for but can expect, wow, we will have done so much good with this technology.
That's fantastic. And last one, what makes you optimistic? I know you are by nature, but what makes you optimistic about the future?
Yeah, I mean, my genetic predisposition, but then most of the evidence. I think
Yeah.
it is very hard, right? I think it is very easy today to be pessimistic for some good reason. And if you take the time to explore all the things that are going well in the world, I think most people should come to find that, in fact, there is so much to celebrate and so much to be excited about. And critically, solutions to many of the problems that we face that are within our reach. And that, to me, is sort of what I try to point to, which is not to believe that the world is perfect, but to believe that we have solutions to many of the problems on our horizon.
And with that, I don't even know if I can say anything more impactful. That is awesome, Zach. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your insight.